Everybody, today I'm in Plainfield, Indiana, which is just off the southwest side of Indianapolis, and we're going to talk about one big factor of Plainfield. Plainfield has so many good things about it. I'm a big fan of Plainfield for a lot of reasons, but one thing about Plainfield that people do notice is, of course, that it's very close to the airport, Indianapolis International Airport. So we're going to get into why that might be a positive thing, and of course, why that might be a negative thing. But is it as negative as you think? We'll have to figure that out, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, I'm Jason Compton with the Compton Home Group. Welcome back to the channel. If you want to know everything there is to know about a place like Plainfield, Indiana, or Indianapolis, Indiana, any of the surrounding cities and towns, then make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the little bell so you're notified every time we do a new video. Now, we have people reaching out to us from all over the country with questions about places like Plainfield, Indiana, or of course, Indianapolis, Indiana. So if you have questions at all about Plainfield, Indianapolis, any of the surrounding cities and towns, make sure you reach out any way that you know how. We'll always have your back with those questions, and we'll certainly have your back when it comes time for you to make your move to Plainfield or anywhere in the Indianapolis metro. So today I'm in Plainfield, Indiana, and I'm actually on the far east side of Plainfield and a little bit south, pretty close to I-70, and I'm in the warehouse district. Not that this is necessarily the most interesting place, but it is kind of interesting in that there are millions and millions of square feet of warehouse space in this part of Plainfield. And it's very interesting driving through here and seeing all of these different warehouses. Not that there are any attractions here, but it is interesting to see. There are a lot of other places to see in Plainfield that are certainly more attractive than this, like Plainfield's extensive trail system, which is incredible, and so many other things too. But I chose this place to kind of talk about Plainfield today because it's the part of Plainfield that's really the closest to Indianapolis International Airport. So being so close to the airport could be an advantage for a lot of people. Of course, if you need to live close to the airport because you use it a lot, you say you travel for business and you're there each week or each month and you want to be under 30 minutes or even 20 minutes or 10 minutes from the airport, you can do that in Plainfield. There's no doubt about it. In fact, there's this road right here behind me. Lots of trucks coming down, delivering things, of course, going to and from some of these warehouses, but just off to my east is the International Airport. In fact, I can hear a jet right now flying off to the south. But being so close to the airport, other than the advantage of having a really short drive to it, the disadvantage would be that you're close to the airport. So of course, it has the potential for having noise, being exceptionally loud. And the International Airport here in Indianapolis, it is not the busiest airport in the world. There's no doubt about that. It's not Los Angeles, it's not Atlanta, it's not Miami, San Francisco. You get out into Seattle, as there's an awful lot of traffic in those places, and of course New York, which is insane. But Indianapolis International is still pretty busy. I mean, right now, as I'm standing here, there's jet after jet after jet taking off, and Indianapolis is actually a big FedEx hub. So while you have major carriers here like Delta, United, American, Frontier, Southwest, and they're of course moving people from place to place, and you have private flights as well. In fact, that one that just flew overhead, that's not a private, that's actually a United jet. But you have lots of FedEx jets coming in and out of this place, and even UPS. So they're delivering, of course, all those Amazon packages to all of us, different parts of the country. So you have some of them passing through here, and you have some originating here. So it's pretty interesting to see, even though Indianapolis isn't thought of as a really busy airport, it actually still has a lot of traffic that comes into it and out of it. It has some quiet periods, but during the day and the week, it's really pretty busy. So whether that's that commercial carrier for people or anything that's going to carry packages for us. So plan on that. And if you live in Plainfield, yeah, you're probably going to hear some airplane traffic from time to time. But actually, if you're in this part of Plainfield, this is where you're going to hear the most. So it doesn't matter as much. If you're in the residential parts of Plainfield, which is going to be further off to the west and further to the north, it may not necessarily be as bad. So Plainfield, even though it's so close to the airport, it could be one of the places that actually isn't as concerned about airplane noise and traffic as some other places in Indianapolis, surprisingly. So the way, and this is a little bit of aviation knowledge here. So the way airports work. So when you're taking off, landing, and you see that big number on the runway, well, Indianapolis International, there are 3 runways there, but the 2 major ones, they run parallel to one another, and they're exceptionally huge, very wide, very long, and that's because they have tons and tons of jet traffic that come in and out of there, and they need lots of room to land and take off. But there's a 23 or a 23 on one side of the runway. Both of those parallel runways have 23 on them, so when you're landing, you'll see the 23. On the opposite side, there's a 5. Well, in any runway that you go to anywhere in the entire world, those numbers have some meaning. So that's really the direction that runway is facing. So think of that as a compass or magnetic direction. So when you see a 23, you add a 0 to that, it's 230. So that means that runway is facing the southwest. It goes 270, that's exactly west, 180, that's exactly south, 230 is in between those to the southwest. And there's an exceptionally loud one just flying right over my head now. That one is a big FedEx jet. So certainly some airplane traffic right through here, no doubt about it. But then the opposite of that, so if you go the opposite direction on the runway, 180 degrees different from 230 is 50. So that's northeast. So 50, just like 0 degrees is north, 90 is exactly east, 50 is pretty much northeast. So depending on the wind, they're going to use at Indianapolis International either one of those runways. So right now today, they're all using runway 23 because they're all taking off towards the southwest. Now depending on their destination, as soon as they get to a certain altitude, they may turn one way or the other. Now that one that just flew directly over my head is still, I can see it in the distance, is still traveling on that 230 heading. So still heading towards the southwest. And it may be eventually going that way to the someplace southwest part of the country. Here's another one. Now that one that just flew overhead, took off towards the southwest, turned right, so it headed north. That would be one that if you're living in Plainfield, that one is gonna fly over the top of you and you're going to notice it. But the ones that fly out towards the southwest, you would only notice them really if you're looking for them. And the ones that turn toward the south or turn back around and go towards the east after they make a left-hand turn, you're never gonna see those. Those things are gonna be way off in the distance and never noticeable in Plainfield really at all. Not unless you're absolutely looking for them. But what about those airplanes that are landing? These are all the ones that are taking off. Well, airplanes land and take off in the same direction as long as the wind doesn't change. So all of these airplanes that are taking off, you can bet that on the opposite side of the airport, there are airplanes landing. They might be landing on a different runway or potentially even the same runway. So one takes off, another one will come in and land behind it. Now those, when you line up an airplane to land on that runway 23, it's coming from the northeast. So actually, a lot of those airplanes will be flying over places like Noblesville, Fishers, and then eventually, of course, directly over Indianapolis. Now the cool thing is that if you're as far north as Noblesville, Fishers, those airplanes are still probably at least 5,000 feet. And they're on their descent towards the airport, but they're not low enough yet. But I can promise you, once you get over the top of Indianapolis, especially once you get towards the downtown area of Indianapolis, and if you live east of that, those airplanes are now getting very low. They're under 3,000 feet. They're going to be noticeable. So while Plainfield is exceptionally close to Indianapolis International, it may not necessarily be the place where you're going to hear or see the most airplane traffic. It could be right in Indianapolis. Now, if you flip things around and the wind is coming out of the north, because right now today it's very calm, so they're gonna use that runway 23. But if the wind is coming out of the southwest, which is the prevailing wind, it usually comes from the south or the west most of the time, they're gonna use runway 23. It's not disturbing all that much and pretty advantageous to use that runway. But if it flips around, comes from the north or it comes from the east, which it does on occasion, they'll flip it around and use runway 5. So that means airplanes are on their descent and getting very low, way off to the southwest. So as they're doing that, in this particular part of Plainfield, you might see and hear those airplanes, but as you get further to the north and the northwest, you're probably going to have to be looking for those airplanes and listening for them to really truly notice them any more than you would any other place in Indianapolis. And then of course, as they take off runway 5, they gain altitude typically so fast, and they're usually turning to the north and then back to the west to go someplace else in the country, or they're turning off to the east or even to the south. By the time they get over most of Indianapolis, they're already at such an altitude that it's just essentially white noise at that point. It's not quite living next to the train tracks where the train goes by and you just don't notice it anymore. It's a lot more minor and a lot more subtle than that, honestly. So living next to the airport, while yeah, absolutely, you're going to hear noise, you're going to see airplanes, but it depends on where you are in relation to those approach paths to the airport and also those departure paths where it's taking off, gaining altitude, and then turning out. That's going to determine the intensity of what you're going to hear, for one, and then of course how many airplanes you're eventually going to see. So if you have questions about Plainfield and where in Plainfield might be one of those places that you could get a lot of airplane traffic, or even in Indianapolis, you know you're not living in Plainfield but you want to live somewhere else like Noblesville, Fishers, or anywhere in Indy, just like I mentioned, and you want to know what it's going to be like because maybe it's something that's super concerning for you. Maybe you used to live next to LAX and just drove you crazy and you want to be super far away from that and never want to hear it again, then you probably better do some research with that. So if you have questions about any place in Plainfield or any place in Indianapolis or the surrounding areas that could be affected by something like airplane noise, then make sure you reach out. And until the next one, we'll see you later.